Hi students, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 10. Chapter 10 begins our last unit, which is going to actually incorporate or encompass 4 chapters, the last 4 chapters of the book, 10, 11, 12, and 13, which is going to cover, Chapter 10 talks all about weight control and energy balance and how to maintain and how to achieve and maintain a healthy weight, essentially. Chapter 11 builds on this by building on the whole concept of physical activity and the different types of physical activity that you can do to help improve your health and achieve and maintain a healthy weight. Chapter 12, I believe, is all about food safety and foodborne illness. And Chapter 13 is all about nutrition and the life cycle. So taking what we've learned most of the class. When we discuss the nutrients, we're discussing it in terms of intakes for the average adult, male or female adults. But nutrition through the life cycle really brings it back to different stages of the life cycle, particularly infancy, pregnancy, infancy, and sort of older adulthood, because your nutritional needs do, of course, change throughout your life. Okay, so all of those are going to be sort of our last unit. Your last unit test will be on those 4 chapters. And so we'll start here with Chapter 10, all about energy balance and weight control. So this is just an overview and outline of the chapter contents, the different sections of the chapter, and of course, as you know, I like to sometimes go a little bit out of order, but I will be touching on all of these parts of the chapter. Okay, so the goal nutritionally with your diet, your goal should be ultimately to achieve and also to maintain a healthful body weight. Now, what exactly is a healthful body weight? Well, we'll talk about sort of numerical values that we can put on our body, that we can use to define what is healthful, but essentially a healthful body weight is one that first and foremost reduces your risk for chronic disease. Certain body weights, whether they're too high or too low, if they're too high or too low, can increase your risk for chronic diseases. And that's something that, in order to be healthful, we'd like to try not to do. A healthful body weight should promote good eating habits and be able to be maintained without constant dieting, without going on these different, sort of schemes for eating and restricting yourself. It should be more of a lifestyle. It should promote good eating habits that are easy and enjoyable to maintain, and therefore you're not sort of going up and down, up and down. Healthful body weight also allows for regular physical activity. Physical activity is important for burning calories, it's important for maintaining or achieving weight loss, but it's also important for your health in a lot of other ways in and of itself, which we'll talk about more in the next chapter, Chapter 11. But lastly, a healthful body weight is one that is acceptable to you. It should be one, we'll talk about the sort of healthy ranges of body weights that help reduce your risk for chronic disease, but some people, even in a healthy, if their body weight is considered healthful according to, for instance, their BMI, it may not be acceptable to them when they look in the mirror, for example. So in order for you to be happy and healthy, you need to like the way that you look, and you need to find your body weight acceptable to you. So sometimes that you can diet in order to get your body weight acceptable, but sometimes it's more working on the psychology and working on your self-image. So in this country, we have a national health crisis, a national health problem of overweight and obesity. So this is information, records from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, from 1985 to 2010, looking at obesity rates in the different states in the United States. And as you can see, in 1985, which is about 30 years ago, less than 15% of Americans, and there was no state that had more than 15% of people who were obese. Now, there is no state that has less than 20 people who are obese. Our obesity rates have nearly doubled. On average, 30%, a third of Americans are obese. Another third are considered overweight. So only a third of Americans are considered at a healthy body weight or underweight. So it's a major, major problem, and we call it an epidemic because obesity obesity in and of itself is not really a disease, but it increases your risk for several diseases, for several chronic diseases, including some of the major killers: cardiovascular disease, so heart attack and stroke; hypertension, which can lead to cardiovascular disease and stroke; type 2 diabetes, another major killer; metabolic syndrome, which is sort of a combination of several of these; some other risks, health risks of people who are overweight or obese: polycystic ovary syndrome, which messes with fertility in females, and menstrual regularity; gallstones; sleep apnea is very common in people who are overweight and obese; gastroesophageal reflux disorder, GERD. We talked about that in the chapter on the gastrointestinal system, when stomach acid refluxes back into the esophagus in sort of a chronic fashion, chronic heartburn essentially, from a weakening of that gastroesophageal sphincter from overweight and obesity. To do some other ones: cancer, another killer, higher risk in people who are overweight and obese. Depression is another one that is very common in people who are obese, and there's sort of a tenuous linkage there. It's not sure whether depression leads to obesity or obesity causes depression, but there's definitely a correlation between those who are overweight and obese and those who have depression. So, in order to maintain a healthful body weight or achieve a healthful body weight, you have to be able to determine whether your body weight is healthy or not. And there are different measurements that we can use to determine whether your body weight is healthful. One is the body mass index, your BMI. One is measuring your body composition, which is lean tissue compared to fat tissue. And the third is to assess your fat pattern, where your body tends to gain weight. Okay? So body composition is the first thing that the book discusses. And when it comes to body composition, your body is composed of different types of tissues. And we can, as nutritionists or health scientists, you can divide those tissues into the fat-free mass and the fat mass. So the tissue that is fat-free is pretty much all of your muscle, your blood, your bones. Most of your body tissue is this fat-free mass. When we talk about lean tissue, we're referring to muscle. Muscle is considered lean tissue, and it's a type of fat-free mass. Total body fat is, so then the other type of body tissue is fat tissue, adipose tissue, okay? Total body fat includes adipose tissue plus your essential fats, which make up a very small amount of the total body fat, but are, you don't want to forget about the fact that fats are essential and they aren't all bad for us, but having excess adipose tissue is. So here's the thing about adipose tissue. You are born with a certain number of fat cells that are supposed to remain constant. And as you gain weight, what happens is not the fat cells don't multiply, the fat cells store more fat and get fatter. So a lean person compared to an overweight person, the overweight person just has larger adipose cells that contain more triglycerides. As we approach obesity, when you are chronically overweight or you reach extreme overweight, two things happen. Your fat cells, they do get fatter, but they also start to multiply. So you actually get more fat cells that are larger. And when you're severely obese, you have both things going on. The cells are very swollen, and they're also increased in number. So what happens is, if someone is if someone becomes obese and their fat cells multiply and expand, when they lose weight, they still have those same number of fat cells. The fat cells don't really die. They kind of, once they're there, there's really not a mechanism to kill them off. So if you are severely obese and you lose weight, you have more fat cells than someone else of the same weight who has never been obese. Let's put it that way. And there's some theories, some thinking that this is why it's very hard to keep weight off when you become obese, or it's hard to lose weight and keep it off because you have more fat cells now. Anyway, so the adipose tissue can be divided into really two different types of fat tissue. You have your subcutaneous fat and your visceral fat. So subcutaneous fat is right under the skin. That's what subcutaneous means, under the skin. So here it is in this little cartoon that actually I stole from a previous lecture, so it should be familiar to you from the chapter on fats. So subcutaneous fat is located under the skin. Its main function is insulation. It helps to insulate the body. It also helps to cushion your bones and your muscles from bruising if you were to get, bumped. And the second type of fat is visceral fat. This is the fat that's actually found inside the abdominal cavity. It surrounds your intestines and your stomach, and it helps to protect your organs. And this is the type of fat actually that you really want to watch out for. Excess visceral fat can compress the organs and cause some of contribute to some of the chronic diseases that we see with overweight and obesity. This third type of fat that the book mentions is brown fat. Brown fat is found in very, very, very small quantities in adults. Brown fat is not so much for storage of energy. Both subcutaneous fat and visceral fat, we store triglycerides for energy there. But brown fat is a totally different type of cell, of adipose tissue, and it has a ton of mitochondria. And if you remember, mitochondria are the little organelles inside of cells that are responsible for producing cellular energy, ATP. And another byproduct of metabolism is heat. So mitochondria generate heat and they generate ATP. So brown fat has a lot of these mitochondria. They generate a lot of heat. Brown fat is found in much higher amounts in infants, newborns and infants, because their thermostatic regulation isn't quite there yet. So they rely on their brown fat to actually keep them warm, help them regulate their body temperature. Also, brown fat is high in bears and other creatures that hibernate, helps keep them warm through the hibernation period. So brown fat, not really found in adults, not really something that is terribly important or relevant, I think, in this type of a course or in nutrition. It's really the subcutaneous fat and the visceral fat that we're talking about when we're talking about body weight and we're talking about body fat. Okay? So some different ways to measure your body composition, to measure how much body fat you actually have, are listed on this slide. So underwater weighing is a very, good, very accurate method of determining body fat. But in order to do it, you have to find a facility that has one of these giant tubs, essentially, that you get in. And you have to weigh yourself outside the tub, and then you weigh yourself inside the tub. And it has to do with how much water you displace. Someone who has a lot of fat tissue, fat is less dense than water, so fat floats. Okay, so if you have a lot of fat tissue, you will displace less water, all right, you'll be more floaty. If you have more lean muscle mass, you will be heavier in the water, and so there will be a technician who helps you if you do this method, and there's fancy math algorithms that they use to take your weight outside and take your weight inside the tub and then calculate what your percent body fat is. So it's a very accurate method, but you have to be able to find a facility that can do it. You can't exactly do this in your house. Dual energy X-ray absorptiometry and air displacement using a bod pod, okay? These are two methods that use very high-tech, fancy machinery that are pretty much only found in research universities or research labs where they are studying, body composition and nutrition. These are not accessible to the average person, but they are very accurate and also probably very expensive. So this is the bod pod here. Essentially, it's the same thing as the water displacement method, except that it's using air displacement instead of water displacement. Another one, bioelectric impedance analysis. This is the one that's shown in this picture here. So you can actually buy these little, you can do this at like a hospital or a nutritionist's office. A lot of times they have the setup. It's basically just a little machine. They can put like attach two little electrodes to you, and they basically shoot an electrical impulse through your body. Very low level, doesn't hurt. And the more water your body has, the faster that electrical impulse will travel from one electrode to the other. So which type of tissue has more water, fat or lean muscle? Lean muscle has more water, right? So the more lean muscle you have, the more water you have, the faster that bioelectric impulse travels. So these machines are fairly accurate. You can also purchase them, like this one that this woman is holding. You just basically hold on to the two electrodes. You can purchase them for like $30, $30 to $60 probably online. Some gyms have them. Some nutritionists and stuff will have them. So it's a little more accessible, and and the machine sort of calculates it for you. But it's not always perfect. It can be dependent on your hydration status. If you're dehydrated, you're going to get a different reading than if you're well hydrated. Things like that. So it's not perfect. Then the last method, which is probably the most commonly used method because it's the easiest, simplest, is skin fold measurements, which basically uses this tool called a caliper, and you pinch the subcutaneous fat in different areas. So behind the arms, the stomach, the hips, the thigh, there's different regions that you have to take measurements from, and then again plug into a formula in order to calculate what your percent body fat is. So all good techniques, the most accessible ones, usually the skin fold measurement or the bioelectric impedance analysis. None are perfect, but they all give you at least a rough estimate of what your percent body fat is, your body composition. So you don't want to be completely fat-free. Remember, we talked about in the chapter on fats that fats are our friends. There's the essential fatty acids that we need. Fat is important for insulation. It's important for, it's actually important for the immune response. It is important for padding and cushioning our organs and our bones, and it's important for transporting fat-soluble vitamins, among other things. So we don't want to be completely fat-free. Too little fat can actually be detrimental to our health. It can increase our risk for infection and injury because of that lack of padding and the lack of that role it has in immunity. But too much fat is also a bad thing. It increases our risk for chronic diseases. So there's a healthy range for men and women, and these are them. So for men, a healthy range of total body fat is 13 to 21%. And for adult women, 23 to 31%. So women need more body fat than men do, quite a bit actually. So something to keep in mind. And then it tells you what the classifications are for overweight, obese, and extremely obese. Next. So body composition is actually a really good way to determine your whether your weight is healthy or not, because let's say you are a bodybuilder and you hop on a scale And so let me actually explain BMI first. Okay, so BMI is your body mass index. Essentially, it's a little math equation that compares your height and your weight. So it's your weight divided by your height squared in kilograms and meters. Or kilograms and centimeters. So it was originally designed as a tool to assess the health of populations, okay? And when it comes to statistics, numbers that we use for populations are not always appropriate for using with individuals. So there's some, sort of error there. All of these different methods, should be taken with a grain of salt. They're not exact, but they are just good ways to estimate your health, right? Okay, so the BMI, there's all these BMI charts you can find. I like this one from the book, particularly because I like the way it's color-coded. I'm into color coding. So green is good. Green means go, right? Green is the healthy weight range. Red, which means stop, red's like kind of bad, is the obese range. And yellow is that middle range, the overweight, which is, you're between healthy and obese. You're sort of headed towards obese, or you're headed towards healthy. And then blue here is underweight. Underweight, we'll probably we'll spend very little time talking about people who are underweight, but underweight is just as serious as a problem as being overweight is in terms of your risk for chronic disease and health problems. But in this country, in America, obesity and overweight are far more prevalent, so that's why we spend a lot more time discussing those. So here's the thing with BMI. It's, like I said, designed for populations, not always good for individuals. And the individuals who it's skewed for are people who are very tall. So their little weight to height ratio is skewed because they're extremely tall. So it might seem like they weigh a lot, but that's because they're very tall. People who are very muscular, again, lean muscle mass contains more water. It's heavier than fat tissue. So someone who is very athletic and in very good shape, very fit because they have a lot of muscle, might weigh heavily. They might be heavy for their height, but it's not because of excess fat. It's because of excess muscle. So for some people who are very muscular in particular, BMI is not a good measurement of their health. A better measurement is they're the ones who really should be looking at their body fat composition. Doing the calipers or the bioelectric impedance is a better measurement for them to determine whether their body weight is healthy or not. Also, children and the elderly often fall off the charts here on the BMI. So the way that you read the chart, of course, is you look up your height and your weight and you follow them to the point where they cross and see where you are. So for an adult I'll just pick 150 because it's even. If someone who's 5'10" and 150 pounds, okay, would be right here, would fall out right here. That would be a very healthy, normal weight for someone who is 5'10". Okay? And BMI is actually what you guys are going to use in your diet analysis projects because it's actually reported on your diet analysis report, on your bar graph report. Up at the top where your profile information, it actually calculates what your body mass index is, what your BMI is. And then you can look and see if it's healthy. You can also look it up on the chart here and comment on that. And that will be part of your last diet analysis assignment is talking about whether your body weight is healthy according to your BMI. So the last method for determining whether your body weight is healthful is looking at your pattern of body fat distribution. Okay, so there's sort of two different classes here. We have what's called central body obesity and lower body obesity, also known as apple-shaped or pear-shaped. All right, so people who are apple-shaped, they gain weight around the middle, around the central body. Okay, so their waist is usually larger than their hips. Their waist to hip ratio is very large. Whereas people who gain weight in their lower body, sort of in their butt and thighs, and not in their central body, these are the pear-shaped people, these people are not so much at risk for diseases as people who gain weight in this apple-shaped body patterning. This central body obesity is much more associated with increased risk of heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes than lower body obesity, interesting enough. So an even easier way to determine your risk for chronic diseases or to determine whether you have central body obesity is just to take your waist circumference. So for a lot of doctors, this is considered the sort of golden standard right now, is just measuring waist circumference is enough to determine whether someone has an increased risk for chronic diseases. So for men, central body obesity is defined as a waist circumference of 40 inches or more. For women, it's 35 inches or more. And notice here in this little diagram from the book that when you take a waist measurement for this waist circumference, it's not at your true weight. When you think of your waist, you're thinking of that narrow point, like right about here. Most people talk about their waist here, like fashion-wise. This would be the waist. Okay, but in terms of this waist circumference measurement, you want to do it just below the navel, right where your hip bones are, the top of your hip bones are. And you want to make sure that the tape measure is parallel to the floor and not sort of scooping. Okay, and then you can look. So that would be something, especially if you are falling in the overweight or obese category in terms of your BMI. For your diet analysis report, you might want to take a measurement like this and see if indeed your waist circumference increases your risk for chronic disease. So when it comes to the body and its need for energy and calorie intake, there's a lot of different things a lot of different functions. So let me back up. I'm kind of changing topics here. So these are all the different ways to determine whether your body weight is healthful or not. Okay? Once you determine whether your body weight is healthful, then we can decide whether or not we need to change your body weight. But in terms of eating every day for maintaining a healthy diet and maintaining healthy energy intake, okay, we have to understand where energy comes from and why energy is important for our bodies. So the body needs energy for everything, not just physical activity, not just jumping and running and playing basketball, okay? Your body needs energy to sit and read. Your body needs energy to sleep, okay? Your cells need energy all the time in order for you to stay alive. So there's actually a surprising amount of energy that your body needs just to be able to fuel those basic activities. But then, of course, on top of that, you need energy to do physical activity. Computer's being very slow. So, where does energy come from? Our energy comes from food. It comes from the macronutrients that we ingest and also any alcohol, because remember, alcohol provides 7 kilocalories per gram, so it does provide calories, it does provide energy. Otherwise, all of our energy comes from our macronutrients: carbs, fats, proteins. Okay? So that's pretty much it. Food gives us energy. That's the only source of energy in our bodies. However, there's a couple of different ways that we expend energy. So our energy output includes these 4 different things: our basal metabolism, physical activity, thermic effective food, and non-exercise activity thermogenesis, also known as NEAT. Okay, so this is something that surprises a lot of people. This bar graph, this pie graph here. The BMR, your basal metabolic rate, okay, that's what BMR stands for, basal metabolic rate, actually comprises about 2/3 to 3/4 of your energy expenditure. So what is basal metabolic rate? This is the basal metabolism that your cells undergo. It's defined as the energy expended to maintain vital resting functions of the body. This is literally in order for your cells to function. If you, it's the rate of your metabolism after you've been fasting and resting for 12 hours. So if you laid in bed and didn't eat for 12 hours, basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy your body still expends just to keep you alive while you're laying still and not even eating anything, okay? It's a lot of energy. You have a lot of organs that need to function to keep you alive, and they require a lot of energy. So the BMR is actually a very large proportion of your energy expenditure. And the rate, your basal metabolic rate, can change. So you're not like born with a basal metabolism that's fixed in place. You can actually change your basal metabolic rate by doing exercise, by eating, but the regulator of your basal metabolic rate with physiologically in your body is your thyroid gland here, which also, if you remember, is important for regulating calcium levels. But your thyroid gland does produce thyroid hormone, which does regulate your basal metabolic rate. And your basal metabolic rate, shockingly enough, is the major calorie burner every day. So a lot of people think that your physical activity is the main thing that burns calories, but it's not. It's your basal metabolism is the major demander of your caloric intake. Okay? So there's a lot of factors that can influence your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. First of all, body composition. The more muscle you have, muscle has a lot of mitochondria in it, just like we said with brown fat. So muscle needs a lot of energy. And so the more muscle you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate. Gender also affects your BMR because males have more muscle mass than females do. So males typically have a higher BMR than females do. And here's my gratuitous picture of the men from the movie Magic Mike, who are all men who have lots of muscle tissue. Okay, so all of these guys in this picture are going to have a high BMR. Body surface area, in other words, your height, can also influence your BMR. So taller people tend to have a higher basal metabolism because their bodies, since they're taller, they actually have more surface area. And the more surface area you have, your body loses heat through your skin. So taller people have more surface area, they lose more heat, and therefore they need more energy to keep them warm, because they're losing heat. So tall people have a faster metabolism. Age affects your metabolism. As we get older, as we age, as we go from adults to elderly adults, your BMR slows down. Actually, even as you go from childhood to adulthood to elderly adulthood, your BMR slows. So it's another thing to take into consideration. And then finally, your calorie intake. Namely, very, very low calorie intakes, like less than 1,000 calories a day, can sort of send your body into sort of this conservation mode where it feels like it's starving, and so therefore your metabolism slows down in order to conserve energy because your calorie intake is so low. So you want to get a sort of optimal calorie intake in order to have an optimal BMR. So how do we calculate our BMR? Well, the book walks us through it, and you don't have to know this for the test. I'm just sort of walking you through the math in case you want to calculate yours for yourself. And so you can also see, I also wanted to use it so that you can see really how many calories you need just for your basal metabolism, just to keep your body functioning, even if you are not eating and laying, stock still. So this is all on page 361 of your textbook. It's this easy formula. You can plug in the numbers. Okay, so the rule of thumb is that for men, they need 1 kilocalorie per kilogram per hour, and women need 0.9 kilocalories per kilogram per hour. So I used as an example a 130-pound female and plugged it into the formula that's in the book. Okay, so 130 pounds divided by 2.2, follow. And what we end up with is 1,276 kilocalories per day. For a 130-pound female adult, her BMR would be 1,276 kilocalories a day. That's how many calories she needs just for her basic body functions. Not to move, not to go do physical activity, pretty much just to sit there still all day long and not gain any weight. This is how many calories she should eat, more or less. Okay, it's all, estimation numbers. So that's a lot. That's a lot of calories that you need to eat just to sit still and do nothing and to maintain your weight. So the other way you can increase your calorie needs is through physical activity. So physical activity, depending on how physically active you are, makes up another portion of that pie, okay? And physical activity is defined as any energy that we expend from any type of movement. So basal metabolism is what's going on when we're at rest. Physical activity is calories that we burn when we're moving. And there's different things that affect how many calories that we burn through physical activity. So not all movements are created equal, essentially. Some are more intense than others. Some are, it depends on how long you are engaging in physical activity. It also depends on what your body weight is, because the heavier you are, the more work you have to do to move. I can testify to that right now, carrying a freaking bowling ball in my belly. Everything is harder. Every type of movement or exercise or physical activity is harder because I'm heavier. So again, I did some brief calculations for you here. So this is similar to the table in your book, but it's a table from my old book that shows you some different types of physical activities, what intensity they would qualify as, whether they're light intensity, moderate intensity, or more vigorous intensity, and how many kilocalories that you would use per pound per hour. So the one in your textbook doesn't give it to you in terms of per pound per hour. It just says how many calories per hour. But this way you can calculate it for yourself, based on your own body weight, how many calories you would burn doing each of these activities. So again, I use the example of a 130-pound person and doing some different activities for an hour. Sitting for an hour burns 80 calories. Just the act of sitting and holding your body upright, that muscle tone that you put into sitting up straight, actually is considered a very, very small form of physical activity, I suppose, and burns about 80 calories in an hour. If you get a little more active than that and you decide to go clean your house, maybe run the vacuum, make your bed, put some stuff away, this burns more calories. So cleaning, I have on here, cleaning is 1.2 kilocalories per pound per hour. And so a 130-pound person cleaning for an hour burns, burns 156 calories. Now, if that same 130-pound person decided to go for an hour-long jog at 10 miles per hour, which is a very sort of average jog, they would burn 620 calories. So sitting for an hour, 80 calories, running for an hour, 620 calories. There's quite a difference there because those activities are different in their intensity. So most people sort of know that, have this intuitive understanding about physical activity and burning calories. And these numbers are similar to the ones that the program uses when it calculates when you put your physical activity in to your activity tracker in that diet analysis software, and it tells you how many calories you burn doing that. It's using a similar chart to this in order to calculate that. So the last two things that contribute to our energy output, how we burn calories throughout the day, are TEF and NEAT. Okay, so TEF is the thermic effect of food. And this is the amount of energy that our bodies expend just to break down the food that we eat. So digestion is a chemical reaction that requires energy. Well, it's several chemical reactions that require energy. And then metabolizing those digested products. So for instance, carbohydrates, when you digest them, you take those long polysaccharides, you cut them up into individual glucose molecules. That's digestion. That takes energy. Then we have to absorb that glucose into cells. Well, that takes energy. Then we have to take that glucose and metabolize it and turn it into ATP. That takes energy as well. And then if we want to then take extra glucose and store it and build glycogen molecules, well, that also takes energy. So, there's a fair amount of energy that's actually used in the digestion, transportation, metabolism, and storage of our nutrients, and it's called the thermic effect of food. Okay, and it accounts for about 5 to 10% of our energy expenditure. Let's see if I can get that pie chart back. Here we go. TEF accounts for about 5 to 10% of our energy expenditure. So it's, it's small, but it's not it's not insignificant. The last thing, NEAT, N-E-A-T, and this pie chart and a lot of different textbooks, they'll sort of lump that into the physical activity component because it's very small and it varies for different people. So what NEAT is, it's non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and essentially it's heat that's generated from involuntary skeletal muscle movement. So this is like if you're cold and you're shivering, or people who are really fidgety, they, like when you do that thing where you like bounce your leg a lot, or if you, are biting your nails or you tap your pencil, all of those things are small involuntary movements, muscle movements, that you don't really necessarily realize that you're doing, but they're actually burning energy, small amounts of energy. Usually, sometimes they can be very insignificant. And some people who are very fidgety or, it might be higher. But it is something that can contribute to our energy output. Okay, so those were our 4 different energies. So our energy input is just food. Our macronutrients and our alcohol consumption make up our energy input. Our energy output is composed of our basal metabolic rate, the amount of energy it takes just to live, physical activity, thermic effect of food, and NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Okay? So when your diet analysis software, or when you want to calculate it for yourself using the formula in the book, if you want to figure out how many calories you need per day, you need to figure out what your total energy output is per day. What is your BMR, which we figured out how to calculate a few slides ago, plus what are your usual physical activity needs, how much food do you eat, so how much TEF, thermic effective food, do you have going on, etc. Totaling all of those different energy outputs tells you how many calories a day you need to maintain your weight. And that is what the estimated energy requirement is, the EER, which is one of the DRIs that we talked about earlier in the course, and is essentially when you look at your diet analysis and it says what your calorie requirement is, that's telling you what your EER is, your estimated energy requirement is. Now, since you can't really estimate what someone's TEF is and what their NEAT is, things like that, there's, dietitians and mathematicians have come up with a formula that you can plug your weight and your age and all this stuff and your physical activity, factor into, and it will generate, it'll tell you what your estimated energy requirement is. Another way to do it is just to look on your diet analysis report. That program has done it for you. You can also just Google EER calculator, and it'll ask you for things like your weight and how physically active you are, and it'll tell you what your daily calorie needs are. So that's where that number comes from. It comes from using your weight and age and amount of physical activity to determine what your BMR is, and therefore determine what your estimated energy requirements are. Okay, so when it comes to weight and energy, essentially you gain weight essentially, we strive for energy balance. We want our energy intake to equal our energy output. When that happens, in this orange scenario down here, when you have energy balance, you are consuming the same amount of food, the same amount of calories that you are burning, so you maintain your weight. If your energy is out of balance, it leads to weight gain and or weight loss. So negative energy balance means that you are burning more than you're consuming. So your energy output is greater than your energy input, and it leads to weight loss. Positive energy balance means that your energy intake is greater than your energy output. So you are eating more calories than you're burning, and therefore you are gaining weight. So weight gain and weight loss are really quite simple. They really are just based on this this equation here, that if you eat more calories than you burn, then you gain weight. If you burn more calories than you eat, you lose weight. It's pretty simple. And this one nutrition instructor in Kansas State, decided to do a demonstration for his students to sort of prove this concept, or to demonstrate this idea that really weight loss and weight gain depend on how many calories you eat versus how many calories you burn. It's not about, what types of foods you eat and whether it's refined grains or fat or whatever. It's all about calories in versus calories out. So he did this little experiment on himself where he went on a Twinkie diet. Maybe some of you have heard of this. It was really big in the news a couple years ago, November 2010 when it came out. So he went on this diet where for 10 weeks he ate just junk food, Twinkies, Oreos, chips, etc. And he only ate, I think his diet was 1,800 calories a day, and he worked out several times a day, so that he was falling into this category of negative energy balance. So he was eating 1,800 calories a day of junk food, but he was exercising enough to burn 2,200 calories a day or something like that. And he lost 27 pounds. His blood lipid levels were reduced, so his HDL went up, his LDL went down, his blood pressure went down. He went from an overweight BMI to a normal weight BMI. He had a lot of success on this 10-week Twinkie diet or junk food diet. And his point was not that this should be a diet that everyone should follow. He doesn't recommend that people follow this diet. But it was just to point out and to highlight that it doesn't matter where your calories come from. If you're consuming fewer calories than you are burning, you will lose weight and you will achieve a better health status. Now, I don't remember if he commented on how the diet made him feel, whether he enjoyed it or not. I also know he was taking a multivitamin to make sure that he wasn't getting vitamin deficiencies, as you would expect someone would from eating all junk food. And also I heard that he would eat like a can of vegetables, like green beans or something, at dinner time with his family, because he had two small children or a couple of small children, and he didn't want them to know that he was on this diet because he didn't want to set a bad example. So he would eat vegetables at the table with them, and then afterwards go into another room and have a Twinkie to be, part of this diet. So, but another sort of valuable lesson from this diet too is to help point out that, you don't have to cut out the foods that you like. You don't have to completely stay away from foods that are unhealthy in order to be healthy. You just need to limit them. It's all about moderation, and particularly moderation of calories. Okay? So overweight and obesity occur for a lot of different reasons. One is overconsumption of calories. Sometimes, in a lot of cases, overweight and obesity in this country are just simply caused by having that positive energy balance. Too many calories, not enough physical activity. But there's other biological causes of obesity or contributors to overweight and obesity. Obesity is what we call a multifactorial disease. There's lots of factors that contribute. So overconsumption of calories is a major issue, but so are physiological and genetic factors can play a big role. Environmental factors that we'll talk about, behavioral factors, psychological, socioeconomic factors are all different factors that contribute to overweight and obesity. So one thing to sort of distinguish when we talk about eating and overweight is hunger versus appetite. And normally I address this earlier, well, my old textbook addressed this in the chapter where we talked about digestion when we're talking about the physiology of eating, okay? But hunger and appetite are two slightly different things. Hunger is physiological. That means it's the physical sensation that you need to eat. So for instance, when your stomach grumbles, when you get a headache, or you're lightheaded, or you just feel tired and low energy, okay, because you haven't had food in a while. All of those things are signs that your body physically needs food, and that's the physical drive to eat, is hunger. Appetite is a psychological drive to eat. So I have here a picture of a little boy drooling over some fresh cookies that are drying on a rack, okay? You smell fresh cookies out of the oven, and maybe you weren't hungry before, but now, oh my God, you want those cookies, okay? Or you're sitting and watching TV and a commercial comes on for some food or restaurant, and you start to feel like, ooh, I'm kind of hungry, or oh, that looks really good, okay? So there's a lot of psychological drives to eat as well. Also, a lot of people eat because they're bored or they're stressed, and those things make them feel hungry, but it's not true physical hunger, it's appetite, it's psychological hunger, okay? So both of these things contribute to our pursuit of food, and both can contribute to obesity, not just hunger, but also appetite, especially with all the different cues that we are subjected to in our society. We have ads everywhere, on the radio, on TV, in public, in print. So anywhere you go, you're basically made to think about food. You see it on a billboard when you're driving. And also we just have a lot of access to, cheap fast food, restaurants, things like that. So there's an overwhelming sort of stimuli in our environment that stimulate our appetite. The last sort of vocabulary word here is satiety. So satiety is feeling of fullness, feeling satisfied with what you've eaten. And we'll talk about, and both hunger and appetite, when you eat, you feel satisfied. Both satiety can be applied to both hunger and appetite, I guess is what I'm saying. Once you eat something and you feel satisfied, whether you ate it because you were hungry or you ate it because you had an appetite, it doesn't matter. And there's a lot of physiological factors, biological factors that help regulate satiety. So satiety can also be physical and psychological. And I think that's on the next slide. Sorry. There we go. So again, the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that regulates hunger and also regulates satiety. And satiety and hunger are regulated by certain hormones that are produced elsewhere in the body. There's a number of them. The book tells you several of them, but the two that I want you to focus on, the two that I'd like you to know, are ghrelin and leptin. So ghrelin is a hormone that's produced by the stomach that signals to the brain that you're hungry. So essentially, as the stomach gets empty, it produces ghrelin, and ghrelin goes to the hypothalamus and says, the stomach is empty, let's eat. Okay, so the ghrelin is a hormone that increases our sense of hunger. Okay? Leptin is a hormone that's produced by fat cells in the body, and it signals in the hypothalamus, it signals satiety. So when you have accumulated enough fat, your body produces this leptin, and the leptin goes to the brain and says, stop eating, we're full, we're satisfied, okay? There's other hormones that are made by different parts of the intestine, okay? So that signal to the brain after you eat. You don't need to know these ones specifically, but just like ghrelin is made by the stomach, there's other hormones that work antagonistically that are made by the small intestine and the large intestine that say, we've got food, we just ate, so stop eating, you're full. But leptin is one that's made sort of on a constant basis by the cells in your adipose tissue, by your fat cells, that tells your brain, we have enough fat stores, we have enough energy saved away, you don't need to eat too much, okay? And there's a lot of research into leptin in terms of its role in obesity and eating, because people who are obese and who have a lot of fat stores produce more leptin and therefore should feel more satiety, but they don't. And when you are underweight, you produce less leptin, and sort of evolutionarily, this should make you feel less satisfied, should make you feel more hungry. That when you're underweight, you have less fat stores and you have less leptin, you should be seeking out food. Whereas if you have more fat stores and you're producing more leptin, you should be not seeking out food and sort of regulating your intake. So leptin is kind of thought evolutionarily that it should be sort of like the natural thermostatic valve of the body in terms of energy intake. It's supposed to regulate how satisfied we feel, and it's supposed to help regulate based on our percent body fat how much we eat. But it doesn't always do that. So I have a little show about leptin in a second, but before I move on to that, I also want to mention a shout out to high fructose corn syrup and fructose and its role in obesity. So high fructose corn syrup, I think we talked about it earlier in the carbohydrate chapter about how the increase in high fructose corn syrup in our diets, in our sodas, in our food has correlated with the increase in obesity in this country. And so a lot of fingers have been pointed at high fructose corn syrup for causing or contributing to the obesity epidemic. And part of the sort of scientific backing of that is that fructose, unlike glucose, actually decreases satiety and stimulates fat synthesis. It has to do with how you metabolize fructose differently than glucose, and also how fructose is, well, not recognized by the brain. So the brain uses primarily glucose. So if you have fructose, the brain doesn't recognize that as being sort of a source of energy or a source of satiety. So there is potential there for fructose to play a role in obesity and overweight. Okay, so leptin. So here's my little, I sort of stole this from an educational video, educational lecture about the science of fat. And so it's going to talk about how leptin levels increase and decrease based on your energy intake, based on how much body fat you have. So again, leptin, this is all the leptin here being produced by the adipose tissue in this normal weight person here. And it's all going to the hypothalamus to stimulate satiety.
So at equilibrium at your normal weight, leptin is made and you're eating different types of food. Now let's imagine you were starving or you went on a diet. Your fat mass would contract and you would make less leptin. This is now the state that led to the less fat. So you've been eating less. Now the response to low leptin is to eat more. A low leptin level is a very powerful stimulus to eat more, gain weight, and return your weight to the starting point. Now let's imagine instead that you went on a binge of eating. You spent an extended period of time eating at wonderful restaurants. You would get fatter and make more leptin, which would then suppress your intake again until your weight returned to the starting point. Now, by such a mechanism, again, weight can be maintained within a range. I'll point out to you that if you diet and your weight falls, leptin level will fall, and this is a potent stimulus to regain weight.
I like that last comment there, that when you diet, and you lose fat, your leptin levels fall because you've lost fat, and that actually, when leptin falls, it makes you hungry because leptin makes you feel full and satiated. So the less leptin you produce, the hungrier you feel. So it's possibly another reason why people feel hungry when they're on diets. When they're losing weight, they start to get hungrier because they're producing less leptin. Well, and this slide I'm going to talk about actually how having not enough leptin could be something that contributes to obesity. So there's different genetic sort of theories of how genetics contribute to our body weight. So genetics are definitely a factor that help determine what our body weight is going to be. So I'm actually going to go in reverse order here since we're already talking about leptin. I'm going to talk about the leptin theory first. So remember, leptin is produced by fat cells, and it gives us that feeling of satiety. So low leptin levels make you eat more, essentially. Leptin reduces food intake because it makes you feel full. So if you have low levels of leptin, then you want to eat more. You never feel full. And these are some mice. Leptin was actually discovered in research in mice. A really obese mouse, like I think it was a fluke mutation, this really obese mouse, and they looked at genetically and they found that it had a deletion in the gene that produced leptin. And you had this mouse that essentially just continuously just ate and ate and ate and never got full and just couldn't regulate its eating, just had this insatiable appetite and just kept eating and eating until it became obese. Okay? They took another mouse that had the same mutation and they treated it with leptin, and it basically cured the mouse. He ate less and he did not become obese. Okay, so both of these mice in this picture are missing their leptin gene, but this one has been treated with leptin and this one has not. Actually, I shouldn't say that for sure. I'm not sure that's exactly what these are, but that's what would happen. Okay, so they found actually that the same condition happens very rarely in humans, and it's a congenital condition, and it's diagnosed early in childhood because these infants and toddlers and children have this insatiable appetite, and they eat and eat and eat and become very obese, and they can't ever sort of control their appetite or their hunger, and they become very obese. You treat this child with leptin, you give them the hormone leptin on a regular basis, and they return to normal body weight. Their appetite returns to normal, and their body weight returns to normal. So the leptin theory of overweight and obesity was that there are some people who just don't produce enough leptin, and therefore that's why they eat more, because they have low leptin levels, and so that makes them eat more, and then they become overweight and they become obese. Well, that was a nice theory, but when doctors and scientists and researchers looked at obese populations of Americans and tested their leptin levels, they didn't find that these people had low levels of leptin and that was what was causing them to become obese, like in this child here. They actually found that these obese and overweight people had higher levels of leptin, which is actually what's expected. They have higher levels of fat. They're making higher levels of leptin. Yet somehow their brain is not responding to it, is sort of ignoring all of that extra leptin. Kind of like type 2 diabetes, where you have high blood sugar levels, but your cells just aren't taking it in. So there's still some theory that obesity or overweight could be similar to type 2 diabetes in that the brain becomes insensitive to leptin, that for some reason those satiety signals are not being received by the hypothalamus, and therefore people overeat and become overweight and obese. So that's one theory. Another theory, let's go up here to the thrifty gene theory. Another theory about overweight and obesity, why some people seem to be more sort of prone or inclined to become obese, is that evolutionarily, if you think back to sort of early days of humankind, we were hunter-gatherers. We had to hunt for our food. We had to run after it, or we had to gather it in the woods. And sometimes food was abundant, and sometimes food was scarce. And so some people, it was thought that some people were lucky enough to be born with a very thrifty metabolism, where during times of abundance, they would eat food and their body would store a lot of it away. And be thrifty with it, just like someone who makes money and puts some in savings for later, for a rainy day. That these people their bodies would put some energy away for later. And then during times of famine, they were more likely to survive because their metabolism was a little bit slower. Their metabolism was more thrifty and was able to better spend the energy and save the energy than someone who had a faster metabolism. Would not be as likely to survive the famine. So this idea that at one point in time that was very advantageous to have a slow metabolism because it helped you to survive periods of famine. But now in our current society where we have an overabundance of calories that are cheaply available, that becomes a disadvantage to have a thrifty metabolism or a slow metabolism. And that is what has led to our current state of overweight and obesity. The last one is the set point theory. The last sort of genetic concept is the set point theory, that it's encoded in our genes, some sort of range that our body weight is going to be. That just like your eye color and your hair color and your height are all sort of determined by your DNA within some range. It's thought that your body weight is predetermined in some range based on your genetics. And this is because, or sort of the evidence for this theory is that, people who, for example, if you got a stomach flu and you lost a few pounds, after you recover from the flu and you return to your normal eating habits, you usually put that weight back on. You gain that weight back. You don't just stay at that weight. Even if you're eating the same diet, maintaining the same number of calories as you were before, your weight goes back. You gain the weight back. So same thing, people who diet lose the weight and then gain it back, that their body seems to sort of want to be within a certain range, is the evidence for the set point theory. So none of these are proven theories. These are all ideas that scientists have that for different people might, fall into different categories too. So different sort of ways that genetics influence our body weights. There's a lot of different environmental influences as well on our food intake and our body weight. So the first one is this whole availability of cheap and high calorie foods. So my example here is fast foods, McDonald's. It's very easy for us to go buy calories as opposed to our ancestors who had to hunt and gather for calories. Okay. Also, when we do that, when we go through the drive-through at McDonald's and we pick up, a Big Mac, we are also not expending any energy to do that. So it used to be that you had to run after your food, or you had to walk miles gathering your food. Or even, 100 years ago, you spent a lot of time maybe grinding the flour or just, mixing all the ingredients together and cooking it. There's energy expended in the cooking process that you lose when you buy food that's pre-prepared. So not only are you buying high-calorie foods, but you're also not spending any energy to prepare them. So it's a lot of intake with zero output of calories. Portion distortion is another issue in our current society. That whole thing about how our portions have grown in the last 20, 30 years. From a normal sized portion to sort of a supersized portion has become sort of the standard. That we've lost the concept of what proper portion sizes are. And that leads to overeating. We have less physically active lifestyles now than we did 50, 100, 1,000 years ago. Not just, in terms of how much physical, in terms of how much exercise we do, but in terms of even our jobs, our everyday lives are less physically active. We used to not have cars. People used to have to walk places or ride a horse or something, or a bike. Now we have cars. We get in a car and we sit and we drive places. A lot of jobs where there used to be more manual labor type of jobs. Now most jobs are desk jobs. You sit at a desk and it doesn't require you to expend any energy. Even things like desk jobs, 20, 30 years ago, if you have a letter or something that you need to get a signature on, you have to physically take it down the hall to another building, wherever, to deliver it to someone. Whereas now, so much stuff is electronic. You can do it all from a computer. You never have to get up from your desk ever. So really, our lifestyles, holistically, have become much lower activity oriented. Socioeconomic factors play a big role in obesity and overweight in the U.S. Numerous studies have shown that there's increased incidence of overweight and obesity in low-income individuals, and particularly in people who have lower education levels. So a lot of this is because low-income people often rely very heavily on cheap calories, which are cheap foods that are very high in bad calories. So it seems, at first, I think when I learned this fact, it seemed a little counterintuitive. You think people who have less money should be thinner because they're eating less food, they can't afford food. But the difference is there's a large misconception that that eating unhealthy is cheaper than eating healthy, which can be true, but also you can find ways to eat healthy on a budget. But it's easier for most people to eat unhealthy on a budget. So people who have low income tend to eat more unhealthy foods, more fast foods, because they're cheaper, and therefore they end up having higher rates of obesity and overweight. Finally, we have the issues of societal expectations of what a perfect body is. These are things that tend to lead to the other extreme, so not so much the overweight and obesity, but these can lead to the eating disorders and underweight categories of body weight. Because in our society, we have supermodels who are these sort of stick figures. So in our society, we value, at least for females, very thin, slender physiques, and a lot of girls strive for that, and we see these images on magazines, etc. And everyone, wants to lose weight and be slender for for aesthetics, to look pretty. So that is an environmental factor that influences our weight. So when it comes to weight loss and maintaining weight loss and maintaining a healthful weight, the first thing you want to do before you decide to embark on a weight loss plan is to first ask yourself, is that really necessary? Is your body weight healthful or not? And you can use your BMI, your body mass index, which you can calculate using a BMI calculator that you Google, or the one that's actually printed on your bar graph from your diet analysis. Okay, according to that BMI, are you overweight? Are you obese? If so, then yes, you probably should consider a weight loss or a weight loss plan. If you are in a normal weight range, you really want to consider, if you're thinking that you'd like to lose weight, but your body weight is healthful, in the healthful BMI range, you might want to consider your reasoning for wanting to lose weight, and whether or not you really should lose weight, whether that's healthy, whether the amount of weight you want to lose is healthy, if that's going to push you over into the underweight category, and assess the psychology of the situation in that case. But a good weight loss plan, when it comes to weight loss plans, the key really is baby steps, is doing things gradually, okay? So the first two things about a medically sound weight loss plan, the two major things that you need to do are you need to reduce your calorie intake and you need to increase your calorie output, okay? So calorie reduction in terms of the foods that you eat and increasing physical activity in order to increase the calories burned. The best weight loss plans incorporate both of these. So we're going to talk about fad diets and like scam diets. And one of the things that's a very sort of big red flag for those kinds of diets is they usually say you don't have to do, usually they say you don't need to do, like, it's a diet, you keep this diet, you don't have to exercise. Or it says you just take this pill and you don't have to change your diet or your exercise. Those are all big red flags. A medically sound weight loss plan does both of these. It reduces your calorie intake and it increases your physical activity. So when it comes to calorie intake and weight loss, the sort of formula is that 1 pound of body weight is equivalent to about 3,500 calories, okay? So you want to achieve a deficit of about 3,500 calories in order to lose, for each pound of weight that you lose. Your weight loss should be gradual. You shouldn't try to cut out 3,500 calories a day. Hopefully you're not eating 3,500 calories a day as is, but you don't want to starve yourself. Again, you really don't want your diet to go below 1,000 or 1,200 calories a day, because then you're not getting enough for your BMR. You're not getting enough for your basic metabolic rate, and that can cause health issues. It can slow down your metabolism and slow down your weight loss. So you want to cut out a portion of your calories per day. And the more calories you can cut per day, the faster your weight loss will be. But your goal should be a maximum of 1 to 2 pounds per week. That means you cut out 500 to 1,000 calories a day. 1,000 calories a day is 7,000 calories a week, which is 2 pounds. 3,500 times 2 is 2 pounds per week. Okay, so cutting out 500 to 1,000 calories per day, depending on what your caloric intake is currently. Okay, so if you already have a low caloric intake, it's going to be hard to cut out 1,000 calories daily. So you might have to really focus on a slower weight loss program. But like I said, you want to consume at least, for women, it's at least 1,000 calories a day. For men, it's at least 1,200 calories a day. You don't want your diet to go below that, to dip below that, because it becomes unhealthy. It slows down your BMR. You're much more likely to be suffering from deficiencies and low energy, etc. So you also want to, and an easier way is to actually increase your physical activity, because then you can burn more calories. So sometimes a lot of diets, dieters pick one or the other. They either decide to go on a diet because they don't want to do physical activity, or they do physical activity because they don't want to go on a diet. And physical activity, increasing your physical activity, increases the amount of calories you burn. So you can have a 3,500 calorie deficit by cutting out 3,500 calories in your intake, or burning an additional 3,500 calories through physical activity. Either one's the same. Either will help you lose a pound, right? But the other benefit of physical activity is that it actually increases your basal metabolic rate. So the more you work out, the more calories you burn while you're working out and doing the activity, but you're also burning more calories when you're resting if you increase your physical activity. So increasing physical activity is a really important way to help maintain weight loss and achieve weight loss. So my funny story about this is I ran a marathon a couple of years ago, and I ran it with a pace group. So it's a group of people that are all trying to finish around the same time, and you basically run the whole thing together. And so, you're running in a group, so you're all chatting together. And this one guy in the group was, I think we were just talking about what made us want to, is this your first marathon, and why are you why did you decide to do this? And this one guy was probably, in his 40s, middle-aged, and he said that he decided to train for this marathon because his employer was having like a Biggest Loser competition at work. So whoever lost, the most weight got some kind of bonus or something, like some kind of health bonus. And he started training for this marathon in order to do that. And he ended up winning second prize. But the people who won the first and third prizes both went on very low-calorie diets. And he said that they were just miserable. They were totally miserable throughout the weight loss process. And, they'd all come to work and they'd be like, oh, what'd you eat for dinner last night? How's your weight loss going? What'd you eat for dinner last night? And these other two people were like, I had celery sticks and, a piece of toast or something really ridiculously light calorie. And this guy, the one who was training for a marathon, was like, I had steak and potatoes, and I had a brownie for dessert, and, had the other people just totally drooling and jealous of him. But because he was burning so many calories through his training, through running, that he could still eat what he wanted. And that's why he chose to go that route, because he didn't want to have to make sacrifices in his diet. He could burn calories through exercise, and he was probably the happiest of the Biggest Loser competitors in his office because of the route that he took. So physical activity, increasing your physical activity, the bonus of that is it allows you to eat more calories. It allows you to enjoy food more than just the diet, a restrictive kind of a diet. So that's why the best weight loss plans really incorporate both. Okay. The last thing about medically sound weight loss plans is that they include a number of behavior modification tips. So your book has like 3 pages of different types of behavior modifications. So ways that you change the way that you eat, essentially. Try to sort of change your bad habits. Now, I really don't like behavior modification tips that use negative words, like avoid, or that use negative sounding words that tell you not to do certain things. Okay, I think that a good the sort of nutrition, the good psychology is to be positive, to always have sort of positive reinforcement. So instead of saying eat less sugar, say eat more vegetables, that kind of a thing. So some of the ones that I picked out that I think are good to focus on, I'm going to talk about, but there's a number of them. And if you are planning on going on a diet, or if you're talking about it in your diet analysis, these are some great sort of tips to reference, to look at to see if they're relevant to you to help you improve your eating habits. So the first one that I like sort of is talking about is actually is one of those, I don't like negative words. Okay, so it says avoid depriving yourself of foods that are bad and instead work on portion control. So instead of saying I can't eat any sweets, no sweets, I'm completely, cold turkey going to quit sugary foods. All right? That's a little unrealistic. If you like those foods, it's going to be hard psychologically and physically to not eat those things. So instead of completely avoiding them and cutting them out, just learn how to regulate your intake and to limit your intake, to just eat them in moderation, okay? Work on your portion control. So it's not like I can't have dessert tonight, but maybe order dessert and share it with 1 or 2 other people, okay? Reading food labels is a really good, if you're not already in the habit of doing that, it can be very informative. Sometimes there are foods that you don't expect to be very fattening or high in calories. One that I always like to bring up is ramen noodles. People think, oh, it's soup, it can't be that bad for you. Ramen noodles have an extremely high amount of fat, and they also have like 60% of your daily value of sodium in one serving. Ramen noodles are just terrible nutritionally. Again, you don't have to cut them out entirely, but don't eat them every day. But yeah, so if you are debating between two different snack foods or something, for example, check out the calorie content and choose the ones that have the lower calories. Serving food on smaller plates. This is another thing that can really help with your portion control. If you have really large plates and you're filling your plate, you're eating larger portions, and by serving food on a smaller plate, it naturally helps you regulate your portion control. Include more fruits and vegetables in your diet and drink more water. Both of those things, those are, again, that's sort of a positive statement. Instead of saying cut back on this, you're saying eat more. Eat more fruits and eat more vegetables. And in doing so, you'll probably eat less of the bad stuff because you'll be displacing it with the fruits and vegetables. And again, if you make an effort to drink more water, okay, you will naturally displace some of the other drinks that you usually have in your diet, like soda or fruit juice or other, caloric beverages. Try to limit your fast food visits to fast food restaurants. Again, don't cut them out entirely necessarily, but, if you are going to McDonald's every single day, twice a day, start cutting back. Go once a day, go 3 times a week, go once a week. Cut back. Baby steps. Gradually make changes, but don't, cold turkey make changes. And also the other thing is when you go to fast food restaurants, another option, if that's really the most convenient thing for you, you don't have time to cook or whatever, try to make healthier choices. So instead of getting, the super size, get the smaller size meal. Or get a salad instead of fries, or get a diet soda instead of soda, or water instead of soda. Again, so baby steps, improving your eating habits. Some behavior modification tips that revolve around physical activity is when it comes to choosing physical activity, you want to choose something that is fun, that you enjoy doing, because you don't want physical activity to be a chore. It shouldn't be. Exercise doesn't have to be a chore. It can be fun. It can be something that makes you feel really good, and should be. And in order for you to have a physical activity regimen that you actually stick to, you're going to have to enjoy it. So choose things that are fun. Choose sort of everyday activities that you can increase your everyday activities of walking by parking your car at the back of the parking lot and walking to the store, or taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Those are ways that you can actually increase your physical activity in little ways. Join a team, like a sports team, like a softball league, or a class, like an aerobics class or a Zumba class. Those can be fun ways to engage in physical activity. And then you have other people who are there doing it with you and supporting you. Another important thing with behavior modification is that you set reasonable goals for yourself. So don't say, I want to lose 5 pounds this week, or I want to lose 20 pounds this month. Okay, that's too much. That's not gradual, and that's really not reasonable. So saying that you want to lose 4 pounds this month, that's much more reasonable, that you want to lose 1 pound a week. Okay, those are reasonable goals. Those are achievable goals. And so setting goals that are unreasonable are just going to lead to disappointment. Try to think positively. Try not to get down on yourself if you stop at McDonald's for lunch and, oh my God, I broke my diet. I ate a Big Mac for lunch. Diet's screwed now. Don't think negatively like that. Think, well, I stopped at McDonald's today for lunch, but I'm going to have a salad for dinner. And that's going to be healthy, and I'll feel good about myself for that. And then lastly, a good suggestion was to join a weight loss program. A lot of people, diet and exercise, eating healthy and working out are things that people can do on their own, but some people need a little extra help and a little motivation. Same thing with school, okay? Reading your textbook and watching the lectures, those are things you can do on your own. You can learn on your own. But a lot of times, you do a much better job, you're much more efficient and effective if you have help, if you have someone to help you and coach you and teach you. So same thing goes for a healthy diet and a healthy exercise program. So joining like a Weight Watchers plan or joining some kind of fitness program can really help you to achieve your goals faster. without you having to really think about it as much. So really, what I have in red print here is that when it comes to weight loss programs, it's important to incorporate both the calorie reduction and the physical activity increase and the behavior modification, all of that together. But mainly, we're not talking about, and when we're talking about a weight loss plan, we're not talking about a diet per se, okay? So when you think of the term diet, you think of something temporary, some kind of temporary eating plan that you go on for a week or a month or whatever, or until you lose the weight. But what we're talking about here in terms of diet is we're talking about a permanent diet, a permanent way of eating and living, a type of lifestyle, okay? So you want your healthy diet to be something that you enjoy and is enjoyable and is healthy, that you eat that way for the rest of your life. And same thing with your physical activity. You want to find something that keeps you active and that you enjoy so that you continue to do it for the rest of your life. So eating healthy and working out should not be something that are done temporarily to change your weight. It should be done permanently to achieve and maintain your weight in a healthy range. So in addition to diet and exercise, there are medical treatments for overweight and obesity. The first type of medical treatment is weight loss medication, which can come in two different forms. You have appetite suppressants, some that are FDA approved, but they're really only FDA approved for short-term use. So the brand name I have here is phentermine, which is a pill that is an appetite suppressant. It suppresses the appetite. There's other sort of like over-the-counter type dietary supplements that help suppress the appetite. They're not necessarily FDA approved, and they have different mechanism the way they work. There's also fat absorption inhibitors, which we talked about in the chapter on fat. Okay, Ally and Orlistat or Ally and Xenical are they're two different doses of a drug called Orlistat. And they essentially inhibit that lipase enzyme that breaks down your triglycerides. So if you can't break down the triglycerides, you can't absorb them, and they just end up passing through. So these are actually FDA approved for long-term use. They do have side effects. We talked about the fatty diarrhea, because you're not digesting and absorbing your fat properly. But they can enhance weight loss when taken along with a reduced calorie diet and increased physical activity. If all of these methods fail, diet, exercise, weight loss medication, there's also the option of bariatric surgery to treat obesity. So this is becoming more and more common and is actually very successful in most cases. It's considered to be a relatively safe type of treatment. These surgeries are considered relatively safe. Less than 1% of patients die from complications. However, there are often a lot of complications. So they have a low risk of death, but a high risk of other medical complications. And most people who I've talked to who have had bariatric surgery have had some kind of complication later, whether it be infection or, infection is the one that most of them talk about. But I mean, really, heartburn, just general gastrointestinal discomfort. There's a lot of side effects. So not always the happiest, most pleasant outcome, but often very, very successful in achieving weight loss and getting people down to a healthy weight. So the different types of bariatric surgeries are as follows. There's gastric bypass surgery, which essentially cuts the stomach here and the small intestine down here, so it fuses the top part of the stomach to sort of a middle section of the small intestine. But it leaves the rest of the stomach and the duodenum still in the body, okay? So sort of you fuse the small intestine here. So that this surgery is technically reversible. You could actually reverse this surgery because all of the tissue is still there in the body. It drastically reduces the size of your stomach. Your stomach goes from being, I can't remember what it says, like from like 30 ounces to 1.5 ounces or something like that. It's very, very small. So it makes you feel full because your stomach is now very small, so it fills very quickly. You can't eat a lot at a time. People who have gastric bypass surgery, if they overeat, they often throw up. They just can't keep a lot of food down. They have to eat small meals. They can't eat things that are very expansive in the stomach. Also, because you're bypassing so much of the small intestine, it really fucks up your absorption, your ability to digest and absorb nutrients. So you can become nutrient deficient if you don't take a multivitamin. So people who have got gastric bypass surgery usually have to take a multivitamin as well to make sure that they are getting the vitamins and minerals that they need, because bypassing this much of the small intestine can severely affect absorption of nutrients. So another type of gastric surgery is the sleeve gastrectomy, which cuts off a large portion of the stomach. So it reduces the size of the stomach the same way this surgery does. So the stomach is smaller, so you eat less. But it doesn't bypass the small intestine, so you still get good absorption and digestion. So you don't have to go on vitamin supplements or anything like that. Also, the part of the stomach that gets removed includes the part that produces ghrelin. Remember, ghrelin is that hormone that stimulates hunger, that makes you feel hungry. So if you're removing the ghrelin producing portion, you don't feel as hungry. You don't get those hunger signals as much. So that can also help regulate your weight. Gastric banding, the other thing about this gastrectomy is it's not reversible. The part of the stomach that's removed is physically removed and discarded. So you can't reverse this. You can technically reverse a gastric bypass, but you cannot reverse a gastrectomy. Lastly, you have gastric banding, which I guess is a more temporary sort of a surgery. It just basically ties a band around the stomach, so it makes your stomach feel smaller. You can't eat as much food because you feel full faster, but the gastric banding has complications as well. The band can move and cause problems. So different types of bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgery is a type of surgery basically that reshapes the stomach and is used to treat obesity. Another type of surgery is liposuction, which is really not a good type of treatment for obesity. What liposuction does is it removes adipose tissue. It removes fat tissue. And I was going to show a video about like someone doing a liposuction. It's really violent looking. I started to like YouTube videos for it, and I got like so sick watching them. I was like, I can't do it. So if you want to YouTube it, it's really violent. They like stick this tube in and they're suctioning out the fat. There's all this yellow fat coming out in a tube, and it's really gross. Liposuction has a higher risk. It's a higher risk surgery, and it's less successful. It really is quite temporary. Usually people who have liposuction gain the weight back because even though they're removing fat cells, the remaining fat cells can still get larger, and also fat cells, they can still multiply. So if you get liposuction and you don't change your lifestyle, you don't change your diet and your physical activity, you will regain the fat. So it's a much more temporary fix and is not recommended as a treatment for obesity. So the last part of the chapter talks a lot about fad diets, okay? And you might already be laughing at the big red bullshit that I have on this slide, because fad diets, this is my bullshit list of, the card game bullshit, like somebody puts down some cards and they say, 3 4s, and you say bullshit, okay? These are the things that if a diet promises any of these things, that's when you should just go bullshit, because it's not going to be a medically sound weight loss program. So what is a fad diet? Technically, a fad is any sort of short-term, short-lived thing, something that comes into popularity for a little while and then kind of dies off. So there's fashion fads, and there's diet fads. So these fad diets often use marketing gimmicks to sell to people, because Americans are overweight, and what do we want to do? We want to lose weight. So, we're willing to buy anything and do anything that sounds like it will be easy and will help us to lose weight. So some of the red flags, the bullshit flags for fad diets are these. 1, they usually promise rapid weight loss, much more than 1 to 2 pounds per week. Lose 10 pounds in 10 days, something like that. And usually that weight loss is, you don't have to do any physical activity. Sometimes you don't even have to diet. Sometimes it's just a supplement. But promises rapid weight loss, usually without any physical activity. Number 2, fad diets often require you to really severely restrict your food. There's a very rigid menu, or there's whole food groups that you're not supposed to eat. So it really limits your food selection. So if a diet does that, call bullshit. If the diet requires you to buy some book or kit or supplement or something that you have to pay money for, okay, that's a big money market, money-making scheme or money-making claim, and you should call bullshit. If it uses outlandish scientific claims, and this is hard, a lot of Americans just don't have the scientific understanding to know when a scientific claim is real, legitimate or not. And one example that I have here is there's a whole diet series of books, diets that are based on your blood type. So different people have different blood types, and this person who has an MD or something after his name has written this diet that's based on people's different blood types, claiming that different diets help different people who have different blood types lose weight. And it's total BS, total BS. But it sounds scientific, it sounds real, and so people think, oh, this is science-based, and this is legitimate, but it's not. Finally, the last sort of BS flag is that fad diets often rely on testimonials. So whether they be celebrities or just everyday people that are saying, I did this diet and I lost X number of pounds and it was so easy and la la la. Okay, so testimonials also are often a big red flag. So some of my favorite fad diets that I'm going to feature and talk about. The cabbage soup diet, typical fad diet. The diet essentially is you make a bunch of cabbage soup and you can eat as much as you want for 7 days. So they advertise that, you're never hungry because you can eat as much as you want, but all you can eat is cabbage soup. And maybe there's some fruits and vegetables you can have on the side. So no grains, no dairy, no protein. It's all fruits and vegetables. So it's all low calories, but you can eat as much as you want of it. It's high in micronutrients, so it's high in vitamins and minerals, but there's certain vitamins and minerals that are lacking because you're not eating meat, you're not eating other, dairy, you're not eating protein, a lot of protein. So this is, again, it's meant to be a temporary diet to lose weight quickly. And also cabbage can have a laxative effect, so it can help you lose water weight as well. So again, cabbage soup diet, fad diet, it limits your food selection, it's temporary, it promises lots of rapid weight loss, a lot of BS flags there. The negative calorie diet, I like this one. This one argues that there are certain foods, namely vegetables that are high in fiber and water and low in calories, that the thermic effect of food, right, the amount of energy it takes to actually digest, absorb, transport, metabolize them, is more than the calories you get from eating them. So for instance, a stick of celery gives you 10 calories, but in order to digest and metabolize it, it takes 20 calories, okay? So that you're actually burning more calories than you're eating just by eating, what was the sort of the gist of this diet. And it's, of course, completely false, but the diet essentially had you eating a lot of these foods to get this negative sort of calorie debt. Acai berry diets, or the acai berry cleanse diets, these were a big scam, big a couple years ago. So acai berries became like this, hot superfood a couple years ago because they're berries that happen to be very high in antioxidants. And Oprah was, promoting them, and all these things were promoting them. So they distilled them into these little pills, acai berry supplement pills, and they started pairing them with colon cleanse pills and selling it together as a weight loss supplement. And they'd advertise like free trial, click here, and you enter all your information, and they send you the stuff, but they also simultaneously start charging your credit card, and it's, some like crazy company out in like the Bahamas, and you can't track them down, and they have your credit card information. And it was actually a big scam, but the diet itself was also a bit scammy too, because it basically had you eating whatever you want. You take this acai berry supplement, which is supposed to like increase your metabolism or something, and then you also take this colon cleanse, like a laxative, that essentially, or an enema, or some component of the diet also involved colon cleansing, which was just just not healthy. So these were bad all around. The HCG diet, another one that's actually like kind of scary. I had a student one semester who was on this diet who introduced me to it, and it disturbed me at the time, and continues to disturb me still. But HCG stands for human chorionic gonadotropin. This is the pregnancy hormone that you're looking for when you do the P-stick test or a pregnancy blood test. This is the hormone that's generated by a developing fetus, and it's thought to help increase metabolism or increase fat burning in certain regions of the body. And the diet itself, so people who are on this diet are taking injections of human chorionic gonadotropin, and also they're on a very low-calorie diet of about 500 calories per day. So this HCG, supposedly the HCG, suppresses your appetite so that even when you're eating 500 calories a day, you're not feeling hungry. And it can cause hormone issues, and also you can become undernourished at 500 calories per day, slows your metabolism down, and is just not really healthy. But we're going to watch a video about fad diets in a second. So then these are the sort of some extreme cases of fad diets. And these are the somewhat ridiculous fad diets, but the amputation diet and the tapeworm diet. The amputation diet is a joke. I found it on a website, and I thought it was funny. That the fastest way to lose 10 pounds is just to cut off your arm. There you go, 10 pounds gone in 10 seconds. But obviously, that's not really a feasible diet. The tapeworm diet is actually not a joke. There are people who do this. It's illegal in the United States to sell tapeworms, but people can buy them in like Mexico and stuff. And they actually think that if they get a tapeworm, so tapeworms will absorb some of the nutrients from your intestine. So it does absorb some of the macronutrients and steal some of your calories. And people who have tapeworm infections oftentimes do lose weight. But there's also a lot of serious complications of a tapeworm infection. It's a parasitic infection that you can have a lot of complications from, including nutrient deficiencies and anemia and other more serious complications that can result in death. So getting a tapeworm in order to lose weight is really not a smart idea. So I don't recommend it, but it's not a joke. It actually does happen. There are people who do that. So I have this great video clip about fad diets that I like that talks about some different popular fad diets. And it's an ABC News clip from about a year or two ago, so some of the diets might be a little bit outdated, but there's a couple of different, they interview a couple of different nutritionists, and there's one that I find really, really funny. But you also get to see that these different nutritionists, some of them have different answers about the sort of reliability or effectiveness or the healthfulness of the different diets. So kind of just goes to show that nutrition is also a little bit subjective as well. All right, play.
Maybe you've tried one of them. The baby food diet, the caveman diet, the Dukin diet, or even the cookie diet. As we start the new year, it sure seems like a lot of celebrities are on fad diets like these. But do they work, and are they safe? Sharon Alfonsi takes a look.
Fad diets seem to sprout as fast as weeds and wither away into obscurity just as quickly. Yet they all offer the promise of the same thing, a quick fix to fat. Because we see celebrities connected to the diets, we may buy into the idea that their abs, that butt, those legs can be ours if we just take the drops, that cookie, these pills.
Sounds so good, and there's the promise. You follow these rules and you get this result. It's hard not to be pulled in.
And it's that mentality that feeds the diet industry, a multi-billion-dollar business looking to market the latest craze or recycle an old one.
The new fad diets are the same as the old fad diets.
But do these diets work? What's behind the craze? For answers, we pose those questions to a panel of dietitians. On a rating scale of 0 to 5, 0 being the worst and 5 being the best, we asked the experts to rate all the diets we selected.
It's almost as if the more
She's my
ludicrous
favorite.
a diet sounds, the more attractive it becomes.
Last fall, Jennifer Aniston found herself the accidental face of promotion for the baby food diet.
Celebrities really don't know anything about diets. What they know is that they've lost weight.
And don't forget, those celebrities have personal chefs, airbrush photos, and private trainers who customize their every meal. People like Tracy Anderson. The trainer to the stars was rumored to have been urging clients to eat baby food. She has sung the praises of pureed foods. They're loaded with nutrients, but she never intended people to go gaga for Gerber.
I actually had baby food companies like, wow, our baby food sounds like, I'm like, are you kidding?
The baby food diet, I would give it a 3 for effectiveness. And that's because you could still, even with baby food, overeat.
Baby food diet, let's go down the middle with it.
So did you ever say to anyone, go out and buy baby food and eat it? Absolutely not. An adult cannot get proper nutrition off of jars of baby food.
One reporter in Chicago wanted to know what all the hype was about, so she tried it out for a day, posting this YouTube clip.
I have macaroni and cheese. Tastes like macaroni and cheese that's been blended.
I try a lot of different things for different reasons.
Even Tracy says she's experimented with dieting.
The most extreme thing that I ever did was I was raw food for 7 months, and I lost my menstrual cycle.
Raw food diet stirs up a difference of opinion among the experts.
The raw food diet, as far as nutrition, I give it a 5.
My rating for the raw food diet is 0 because it is potentially dangerous and deficient in many nutrients.
The diet requires its followers to eat all raw all the time.
The positive in the raw food is that a lot of people do start eating more fruits and vegetables. And the average American is not eating enough fruits and vegetables.
This one came into vogue when Demi Moore, in That Body, was believed to have tried it. But for this group of devotees, it's not a fad at all, but a whole way of life.
It's tough. I actually kind of don't really date anymore because I won't go to a regular restaurant.
So you're not dating because of you want to eat this?
Yeah, partially.
Following up on the pure and unprocessed path is the caveman diet. Actress Megan Fox is the celeb rumored to be a fan.
I like the caveman diet.
The caveman diet, as far as nutrition, I would give it a 4.
Caveman cuisine, a diet of raw fruits, vegetables, and meats.
In today's world, you can't eat like a hunter and gatherer if you're sitting on the couch.
From caveman to the ultra-civilized, at the forefront of pig fads for 2011 is the Dukan diet, a protein-heavy diet in 4 phases.
The Dukan diet, as far as effectiveness, I'd give it a 4.
It's the #1 diet in France, and believed to be the one that Kate Middleton's mother is using to get ready for her daughter's royal wedding.
Definitely very trendy.
I think it gets very confusing with all the different cycles and phases, and I think for the average person, they could get a little lost in what they're supposed to be doing.
Our own J-Lo is said to have caught royal wind of it, trying the carb-restricting diet to shed baby weight. And some people think it's as simple as a cookie. Enter Snooki.
It used to be like that, and now I'm like, the best.
There's beef protein in the chocolate chip cookie.
Jersey Shore's Pipsqueak Snooki has used Dr. Siegel's famous beefed-up cookies to keep her hunger pangs away.
We all wish that we could just sit and eat cookies and lose weight all the time, but it doesn't work.
It is not dangerous, but it's not something I would endorse it to.
Isn't it cute that Snooki rhymes with cookie? The cookie diet 0.
She gives everything a 0.
To curb your hunger to using this. The makers of the HCG diet say a pregnancy hormone derivative can suppress the appetite.
The HCG diet, it just frightens me in so many ways. The diet and the HCG, I have to go with the 0.
The HCG diet, a big fat pregnant 0.
When you put them under your tongue, you basically feel a little bit of a burning sensation.
But this diet's devotees believe in the drops. The company that makes the homeopathic drops claims that when taken daily for between 20 and 40 days, HCG can help the body feel full on just 500 calories a day.
As I started to lose more and more after I did the second round, people stopped recognizing.
Another Jersey Shore reality TV star, JWoww, is the celeb rumored to be reaping the HCG benefits. If it all sounds toxic, we could flush it out. Naomi Campbell, Beyonce, Demi Moore, and her hubby Ashton have all tried the Master Cleanse.
To me, it's a fast, not a diet. I would give it a 1, and that would probably be being generous.
The Master Cleanse diet is definitely a big 0.
The Master Cleanse is also known as lemon detox, lemonade diet, or maple syrup diet. It's a few days of survival on water, lemon juice, maple syrup, and cayenne pepper.
Anytime I see the word cleanse or detoxify, I'm wary because it's usually code for, excuse me for this, diarrhea.
You will lose weight on it. Plain and simple. You're not eating anything.
Which makes this next diet seem like a vending machine lover's dream.
The Twinkie diet. Well, it makes us all smile saying the Twinkie diet, but in terms of actually doing it, I would give it a 1.
The Twinkies diet, 0.
We couldn't find a celebrity on this one, but we found this guy, nutritionist Mark Hogg, who lost 27 pounds in 2 months dining on junk food. His point, it's not what you eat, but how much you eat.
The message was, watch your calories, not necessarily just eat Twinkies.
With some of the worst eating habits in the world, are celebrity-infatuated Americans really ready to trade in their love affair? Decadent treats, fat-laden, golden-fried, irresistible, greasy goodness for real commitment?
If you really want to change your relationship with food and you really want to get results that are going to last, you need more than a fad.
It really boils down to just a simple question. Are you willing to give up these buns for those buns?
So the moral of the video there is the same thing I'm saying, that it's not about a diet, a temporary diet. It's about a lifestyle change when it comes to achieving and maintaining healthy body weight, okay? So I just love that one nutritionist who gives everything a 0 and used the word diarrhea. So another type of fad diet that we can talk about are the fad diets that focus on different types of macronutrient distribution. So those different types of diets include a moderate fat, high carb, moderate protein diet, which is essentially what the My Plate recommendation is. Essentially, it follows My Plate recommendations. My Plate recommendation, or the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, that pie chart, says that most of our calories should come from carbs, and then a moderate amount comes from fats and proteins. And some of the different diet programs that follow this pattern are Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig. A lot of the more popular sort of weight loss programs follow this distribution of macronutrients. The other two types of diets that are out there, so this is sort of like a standard healthy American diet. Then the sort of fad diets come in when you have the low carb diet. So this one here is, we're talking about a low carb diet or a low fat diet, okay? So the low carb diets are the Atkins diet. Some others include Sugar Busters, Carb Addicts, even I think South Beach diet sort of started out as a low carb diet. So these programs essentially ask you to cut your carbs and therefore increase your fats and increase your proteins. These diets are often very successful, particularly in the beginning. You lose a lot of weight, you lose a lot of water weight initially, because the reason for that is that when you don't have carbs in your diet, your body starts breaking down the glycogen stores, your carbohydrate stores, to get glucose for your brain in particular, which really relies on glucose and can't use fats and amino acids for energy. And that your cells that contain glycogen, they also contain water. Water is stored glycogen. So as you break down glycogen, you're also losing water. So initially you lose a lot of water weight in these low-carb diets, and they are fairly, but also these low-carb diets often end up being lower calorie diets. When people cut carbs from their diets, they often are not necessarily aware of the fact that they're cutting calories, because eating more like fat and protein is more satiating. They're more filling than refined carbohydrates are. And refined carbohydrates add a lot of calories. Added sugars add a lot of calories to your diet. So if you're cutting your carbs, a lot of times you're cutting your calories. And that's really how these diets work. It's not something magical about carbs. It's actually that low-carb diets actually help people to cut their calories. And for a lot of people, low-carb diets are easier to stick to than low-fat diets, because they can eat foods that are high in fat, and fat is very satiating. Same with protein. When you go on a low-fat diet, a lot of times low-fat diets are the ones that make you feel like always hungry, because fat is something that signals satiety in the brain. So low-fat diets often are harder to stick to. But when you compare the two, a low-carb diet and low-fat diet on a long-term basis, or like a year, 6 months to a year, they both result in roughly the same amount of weight loss. It just has to do with how long can you stick to the diet. And people tend to be able to stick to the low-carb diets better. So those are also kind of classified as fad diets. Low-fat diets were a fad more in the 90s, whereas low-carb diets became more popular in the at the millennium, the early 2000s. So the last thing about weight loss is there are weight loss supplements out there that sort of has to do with fad diets. So in addition to fad diets, there's also a lot of scammy sort of products, dietary supplement products, over-the-counter things like Trim Spa and Metabolife and all these things that are often not, they don't work, and a lot of times they can be dangerous. They can have very dangerous side effects. They're often marketed with false claims, and so I have this big, no smoking sign. Don't take dietary or weight loss supplements. They oftentimes don't work. Sometimes they're just caffeine in a pill. They give you the jitters. And sometimes they are diuretics, and sometimes they are other compounds that actually can be very dangerous. So avoid those. I mentioned at the beginning of the chapter when we were talking about BMI that being underweight is actually a health concern, just like being overweight is a health concern. So being underweight is having a BMI of less than 18.5, and it can result in health issues. It's not as big as, I think only about 3% of Americans fall into this category, as opposed to 60% of Americans being overweight or obese. So it's a much smaller problem, but it might be a problem that affects people that you know or people in this class, and it's definitely a real condition, so it's relevant to discuss. There's a lot of different causes of underweight. Sometimes people are underweight just genetically. They have a fast metabolism, or they have a very active lifestyle, so they have trouble. They either don't have time to eat, or they burn so many calories from doing physical activity, and they don't know how to eat enough to maintain their physical activity, their calorie burning. Chronic diseases can cause underweight if you have issues with absorption, or disease that causes you to lose your appetite, or like cancer can cause underweight, and psychological conditions like eating disorders, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if you are in this class of people who are underweight, who are your BMI is 18.5 or lower, you should be focusing on gaining weight. And the way that you gain weight is essentially the same way you lose weight, but flip it. So just like weight loss, weight gain should be done gradually. You don't want to just like binge and pig out and try to gain weight quickly. You want to increase your calorie intake by about 500 to 1,000 calories a day. And you don't necessarily want to reduce your physical activity. You want to change your physical activity instead of having it be sort of more cardiovascular, you want it to be more muscle building. So resistance exercises like weightlifting, those things help to actually build body mass, build bone, and build muscle. And so increasing your calories and incorporating more weightlifting and resistance exercise can help you to increase your body weight, which is not how Captain America happened to increase his body weight. In the Avengers, Captain America, the first Avenger, if you saw the movie, starts out super, super skinny, and then they put him in this machine and inject him with something, and 5 minutes later he looks like this, which is not for real. But if this little guy here increased his calories and his weightlifting, after several months to years, he could actually look like this. It's all about, the regiment, and also, genetics, so not always possible. So eating disorders is the highlight in this highlight section in this chapter. And it's an important topic to discuss in a nutrition class. It's something that affects a lot of Americans, much more common in females than in males, also related to sort of the social norms and the social standards of what beauty is. So there's a distinction to be made between eating disorders and disordered eating. So disordered eating is when you engage in sort of unhealthy eating habits in order to reduce your weight. So like skipping meals is sort of a classic sort of type of disordered eating. So not eating breakfast and or lunch in order to reduce your calorie intake. An eating disorder is technically classified as a psychiatric condition. It's a psychological condition that can be diagnosed, and it usually involves a distortion of the body image. So I like this Picasso. This is a Picasso painting of a woman looking in a mirror, and you can see the image in the mirror is different than the image outside the mirror. So what she sees in the mirror is not what is actually in reality. That eating disorders usually involve a psychological component of body dysmorphia, so not seeing your body correctly. So the two different types of eating disorders that we'll talk about are, we're going to talk about anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, which are eating disorders that cause you to lose weight. But then there's also binge eating disorder, which is an eating disorder that leads to obesity or overweight. So anorexia nervosa, here's another picture that illustrates that body dysmorphia. A girl who's clearly anorexic, underweight, you can see her spine, you can see all the bones in her legs here. looking in a mirror and seeing a very different picture, seeing someone who probably weighs twice as much as her, who's not fat, probably within a healthy body weight range, even, but this is not the same, the same picture on both sides, okay? So anorexia nervosa is characterized by extremely restrictive eating practices, eating very, very few calories a day, definitely less than 500 calories a day, usually. It's a form of self-starvation, and some of the psychological issues are there's always an intense fear of weight gain, sort of an obsession with being thin, and an intense fear of becoming fat. The severe caloric restriction results in a loss of menstrual periods. If your body does not have enough energy to fuel itself, it's definitely not going to have enough energy to fuel the formation of a fetus. So your reproductive system, when your energy needs are low, your reproductive system shuts down. It's like a default. And there are several complications that are possible from anorexia nervosa. Starvation, first of all, malnutrition. Electrolyte imbalance can also be a big problem. Electrolytes are needed. Your fluid and electrolyte balance, if they're off, they can cause misfiring of your muscle contraction and your nerve transmissions, and can ultimately stop your heart. And if you are really restricting your food and water your food intake, or you're drinking lots of water and not intaking food, you throw off your electrolyte imbalance and you can die from heart failure. Also, other psychological, sort of secondary psychological effects, suicide rate is fairly high in females with anorexia nervosa, or people, I should say, with anorexia nervosa. The statistics in this country, about 0.5 to 3 anywhere from 0.5 to 3.7% of U.S. females suffer from anorexia in their lifetime. That's actually pretty high. Chances are there's at least one person in this class who suffered from it. If not, there's at least one person, and there's probably several people in the class who know people who have suffered from anorexia. And it's difficult. It's a difficult disease to recover from, and a lot of females do not recover from. I think the stats are about 50% of females recover from anorexia nervosa. About 20% have it recurrently throughout their life and are struggling with it for very long periods of time. But it's a very serious health condition, and the statistics are really anywhere from 4% to 20% of people with anorexia prematurely die from complications of the disease, whether it be starvation, something that's actually an effect of the starvation process, or from suicide. But it's definitely can be very deadly and very serious. Bulimia nervosa is another restrictive type of eating disorder that's characterized by periods of binge eating followed by purging. Okay, binging and purging are the characteristics of bulimia. So a lot of anorexics also engage in purging activities, so vomiting, working out excessively, taking laxatives, ways to get rid of calories that they've eaten. But the difference between bulimia and anorexia is that bulimia, they engage in these binge sessions. So binge eating is when you eat a very large amount of food in a short period of time. Oftentimes binge episodes, you're eating like 2,000 to 4,000 calories in one sitting. Just like a whole box of donuts and a half a carton of ice cream and a bag of chips. It's a lot of food in a short period of time, followed by some type of purging. Usually vomiting, also can be laxative abuse, it can be excessive exercising. There's different ways to purge. The complications from bulimia nervosa, so bulimics a lot of times don't necessarily lose weight. They oftentimes just maintain their weight because they're eating a lot and then they're trying to purge it. So it's not the same as anorexics, which often drop into very low, often become underweight. Bulimia can be more invisible because the person doesn't necessarily lose weight. But it can cause several complications. A lot of bulimics are actually diagnosed or discovered, by their dentist, who notices erosion of the tooth enamel, other signs of forced vomiting from stomach acid eroding the enamel, also scarring on the fists, on the knuckles from jamming your hand down your throat, and inflammation of the salivary glands and other glands in the neck and throat from repeated vomiting can all be signs and also complications of bulimia. Just like with anorexia, you can have electrolyte imbalance. With anorexia, it's usually because of not taking in enough of the electrolytes or diluting them by taking in too much water and not enough food. Whereas in bulimia, electrolyte imbalance often is from the excessive vomiting or diarrhea from laxative abuse, which can be deadly, can stop your heart. Esophageal tears that can be very serious from repeated vomiting. So bulimia is slightly more prevalent than anorexia in the U.S. Estimates are 1.1 to 4.2% of females suffer from bulimia in their lifetime. Males also can have eating disorders as well. About 5% of the eating disorder population is male. So about 90 to 95% of people with eating disorders are female. So that's why I usually use the word female. And about 4% of bulimics will die prematurely from complications of their disease. So again, it's very dangerous. It can be very dangerous. So if you know someone who has an eating disorder, it's really important to get them help, to get them that help psychologically, because again, these are disorders that stem from psychology. The overeating disorders are night eating syndrome, NES, or binge eating disorder, BED, okay? And these are fairly common in the U.S. 2 to 5% of Americans suffer from binge eating disorder, and it is something that can contribute to obesity. So unlike anorexia and bulimia, which are associated with underweight, or bulimia sometimes is normal weight, overeating disorders are characterized by obesity and overweight. So these are people who go on binges but don't purge, eating large amounts of food in a small amount of time. And the last thing about eating disorders is this here, the female athlete triad, which is very common in female athletes in sports that emphasize leanness, so things like gymnastics, dance, track, or cross-country running. I just learned this the other day that ski jumping is also another one that's just, it runs rampant. And these are girls who are competitive, they're trying to win, and they're being told they need to be thinner, they need to lose weight. And so you get this female athlete triad. And what happens is they have eating disorders or disordered eating, which causes them to, so they have low calorie intake, and they're exercising a lot because they're athletes, so they have high energy needs. So their overall calorie deficit causes them to have menstrual dysfunction. They stop having their period, essentially. And also, if they're not getting they're doing a lot of physical activity, but they're not getting the nutrients that they need, it ends up causing them to have bone weakness or osteoporosis. So oftentimes these females get diagnosed when they are, dancing ballet and they fall and they break their ankle, or they break a bone that should not have been that weak, and the doctor discovers that they have low levels of osteoporosis and that they're not having their menstrual cycles, and then that is the sort of the diagnosis of a female athlete triad: disordered eating, loss of periods, and bone weakness. And it's important for these girls to get treated, because obviously they can't be at their best at their sport if their body is not healthy. So something to definitely look out for if you're a coach of these type of sports, if you participate or you have children that participate in these types of sports. It's definitely something to there's very high frequency. The frequency in these sports is much higher than in the general population. So that is Chapter 10, all about healthy body weight, how to achieve it, or what it is, how to define it based on body composition, BMI, or your body fat patterning, and then how to achieve it through healthy eating habits and healthy physical activity, and then a little bit about unhealthful body weight, so obesity, what it is, what some of the factors that contribute to obesity are, and eating disorders, so a little bit about underweight and some of the consequences of that. So that is Chapter 10, and sorry the lecture was much longer than I expected it to be.